Hi there, this is Dennis Velco with OutBüro. You're listening to OutBüro Voices, where we have engaging conversations with LGBTQ professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders from around the world. And today we have Art Smith. Art is not only an artist, he's also a champion for LGBTQ history, and I'm going to let him share the project and some of his background. It is called the Gay Barchieves. And so, Art, let's have a little bit of information about you and perhaps some of your background, and then we'll get into your large, interesting project.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dennis. I appreciate the time being here and being able to talk about the Gay Barchieves project. Just to give you a little bit of insight, basically, my history with gay media started back in the 80s when I was tapped to take over a monthly gay entertainment guide in Atlanta, and suddenly thrust into the position of being openly gay to everybody that I met. At that time, being a representative of a gay publication, you walk into a business and you're instantly saying, "Hi, my name's Art and I'm gay," which in the 80s was a little bit different than it is today. But that kept me in tune at the time with a lot of the goings on of the gay bar scene. And I continued my involvement with gay publications even when I moved to Florida and worked with the Central Florida LGBT newspaper called Watermark, writing their nightlife column. But more recently, in the end of 2019, I was having a conversation with one of the owners of probably the most well-known gay nightclub in Atlanta, Backstreet. And her name is Vicky Vera. She and her family owned the club. And I was asked to create a commemorative design honoring the 45th anniversary of the opening of Backstreet. They opened in 1975, and 2020 was their 45th anniversary of the opening. And they've been gone over 10 years now, but still a very active community online, sharing memories from Backstreet. So I created the design and I made it a fundraiser for the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence in Atlanta. It was overwhelmingly popular, and I got to hear from a lot of friends in Atlanta and people around the country online suggesting that, Backstreet isn't the only bar that should be remembered. And so I started doing research and reconstructing digitally the logos of a lot of bars that have been gone for decades, and did several other bars in Atlanta. By the time March rolled around, we suddenly got hit with this COVID lockdown, and I found myself with a lot more free time on my hand. There was no going out to speak of. Retail and bar activities were curtailed substantially. And so I threw myself into this Gay Barchieves project head first. That was in the middle of March. So 10 months later, I'm now at over 1,250 bars from across the country, gay bars, that are no longer in existence. I've researched their background. I found out about where they were, when they opened, digitally reconstructed their logos. And it's just kind of taken on a life of its own.
Very, very interesting. And, as we were talking in our initial conversation, the bar scene for the gay community has been historically a central hub, a community space. It was to go out and have some drinks and possibly meet someone or something like that. But it was also a real place where people got their news, their information, their health information, especially when looking at the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And so bars, I think, in the LGBT community have a very different kind of um, attraction, allure, and so forth than perhaps in other communities.
Absolutely. In fact, on our website and our business cards and various other formats, we've declared our mission for Gay Barchieves. And basically, what it says is that our mission is to build the world's largest archive of the logos and stories of gay bars from the past, preserving the memories of the places that were so significant to the growth and development of the LGBT community. And that kind of encapsulates in a nutshell what the scene was all about. One particular shining star that comes to mind is a woman from Atlanta. Her name is Dina Collins, and she had a lesbian bar called The Rose, which was very popular and a very nice club. But then she decided she was going to expand a little bit, and she opened a new club called Dina's One Mo Time. And just to give you a little perspective on how that was, first of all, the tagline for the bar was not something like, party with your pants down or something. Her tagline was a bar with a sense of community. And she was completely committed to supporting her kids, as she called them. She was kind of a den mother, especially for the younger gays and the gays who were affected by HIV. So much so that at one time while she owned the bar, there were many nights where she would spend the night in the bar. She had a small apartment in the back, and she would spend the night there after she closed up at 3 or 4 in the morning so that she could be awake at 7 o'clock in the morning on property to make breakfast and give shelter to the homeless LGBT community and the people with HIV who were suffering because there were no social programs at the time to help support them. That's something that stands out in my mind as completely different than the type of scene that we associate with gay bars.
That's a really great story, and there's so many defining moments as well in LGBTQ history. Of course, Stonewall launching off, but you also mentioned another bar, which because I've never visited New Orleans, I had not actually heard that story. So would you share that particular story with our audience?
Yeah, that was one of several actually stories that were right around the time of Stonewall, or in some cases prior to Stonewall, that impacted how our community banded together and how we were affected by, the community response to gay bars. The bar you're talking about was called Upstairs Lounge, and it was in the French Quarter in New Orleans on Chartres. In 1973, on the fourth anniversary weekend of Stonewall, they had a big celebration in the bar. There were about 125 people in the bar. And keep in mind, this is a small bar in the second floor of a building. The local MCC pastor and a good chunk of his community was there because they also used that bar as kind of a meeting place and refuge. That afternoon, there was someone came to the door. Of course, at that time, they had a buzzer at the door. You couldn't just walk in, kind of a security feature. And somebody had put a bomb or an incendiary device under the wooden staircase that led up to the second floor. Then they went outside and rang the buzzer, and somebody came down to open the door. When they opened the door, the incendiary device just burst into flames. The entire staircase was engulfed in flames, and about 65 people were trapped upstairs. Out of those 65 people, 32 died in that fire. And it was a really gruesome sight. Because of the difference in the way safety laws and regulations were back then. It wasn't as easy to get out of the building. Fire exits weren't marked the way they are today. And the staircase was the only staircase really leading down, and it was engulfed in flame. So people tried to climb out the windows. They tried every way they could to get out of the building. And one harrowing image is that the pastor of the MCC had tried to escape through a second floor window and got trapped by the iron bars that were there to protect people from invasion. He burned to death, and the local authorities left his body in the window for a couple of days, all charred and burned right on the corner second floor window. But the really sad part about it, in addition to the fact, of course, that 32 people lost their lives, is that probably half of those people were never claimed by their families because it was an embarrassing situation to admit that a family member had perished in a gay bar fire. And that was in 73. So that's not 100 years ago. It's not even 50 years ago. But the sad thing to me is that that was the biggest attack on a gay bar in the history of the United States and had the most deaths, and yet we never heard about it. Even when the Pulse tragedy happened in 2016, and everyone was saying 49 people died, the biggest tragedy in gay history, blah, 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 it never came up. It's kind of like it was swept up under the rug. It wasn't covered by media much. After a day or two, it wasn't even in the news. But that just gives you an idea of how things have changed since then, because at that time, like I said, even the Metropolitan Community Church used the bar as kind of a second home. And it was a very tragic event that just kind of got lost. But of course, in the course of this project and doing all this research on the gay bars that used to be, I'm uncovering stories like this all the time, whether they be tragedies or they be happy stories about things that happened. There's a lot of history out there that we just don't hear about.
Very, very interesting. And, yes, that was when you were sharing that story with me originally, as I indicated, that was the first time that I've, ever have heard of that. And it is unfortunate that, during the Pulse incident that, that wasn't, at least referenced in some, manner. So, right. And it's likely because of the lack of access to a lot of that kind of content, pre-internet. So right. No one could just Google search and find the news articles about it very, very easily. So this is a wonderful service for the community. And, I personally have, great stories of myself. My first bar that I ever went to, because I went into the military right after high school, and basically came out in Germany while in the military. Of course, back then it was 86 through 90. You couldn't be out in the military. It was even pre Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And the kind of nondescriptness and so forth of gay bars, for safety, was very even prevalent in Frankfurt, Germany. I think I messaged you the bar that I went to that's no longer around, called Construction 5. It was the place to be in Frankfurt during the mid to late 80s and early 90s. And it was somewhat similar, and it was in the basement of a building, of a commercial building, like an office building. Right. And the doorway was actually off the where the trucks would pull up to deliver, office supplies and things like that. So you would be literally going into this alcove where the trucks would pull in, go up these few stairs, which it looks like you'd be going into like the warehouse of, the building, but you open the door, and then with a small landing, you would go down the stairs pay your 5 marks to enter, and the whole club was in the basement. And so it was very, very, very interesting. I mean, there's, yeah, I think it's a great service that you're doing. And so so what are your plans for this, directory almost? And how do people possibly get involved?
Well, there's several stages to this project. Of course, I have a website called gaybarchieves.com. And on that website, there are numerous tabs that provide different types of information. The bars tab is a listing by state of the bars that have been archived so far. So you can go to that page and you can see a list of the bars from California or New York or wherever, broken down by city, that have already been documented. And as I said, there are about 1,250 bars at this point. It's growing every day. Most all of those bars are in the US because that's where I am, and that's where I'm able to connect with the people and get the information I need. Ultimately, I want to include more international bars. Right now, there's about, I think, 20 or so from Canada. There's 1 or 2 from France. There's a couple from England, but for the most part, they're in the US. So that's stage 1, is just documenting the information and digitally reconstructing their logos whenever possible. Some of these logos are just impossible to track down. The bars didn't advertise as much, especially when you get back into pre-1980. A lot of people don't realize how far back some of the gay history goes, but there's actually documentation of gay bars and gay hangouts that existed into the late 19th century. So it's not necessarily stuff that all happened in our lifetimes. So that was stage 1. Stage 2 is I'm working on a video series in conjunction with channel125.com, which is an online resource for LGBT videos of varying types. There's a whole section on pride videos from different prides. There's gay talk shows like a Gay View or Deja Gay, which is kind of talking about some gay history. And there's a new show that we're launching called Gay Barchieves, which will be segments, whether they're me talking about the history of some of the bars that I've uncovered, or whether it's people like you or the bar owners or whomever talking about their memories from bars gone by. Because those are things we need to capture too. And in some of these bars, like for instance, Dina Collins in Atlanta, she's 85 years old. I want to capture her story while I still can. She's still vibrant, she's still active, and she still talks about her glory days in the bar scene like you wouldn't believe. But I want to capture those stories while we can. So the video series is part 2. And then ultimately, I would also like to produce 1 or more coffee table style books that features the designs and brief histories of the different bars. So there's multiple aspects to it. Right now, I also have some t-shirt designs featuring logos of many of the bars that I've archived as well. And that can be accessed through my Gay Barchieves website.
Awesome. And I would imagine perhaps since you are doing that, if someone finds a bar logo on your site, could they reach out to you to say, well, you don't have a t-shirt of this yet, but would you be willing to make it?
Absolutely. And in some cases, they're kind of tribute designs, based on different things. Not every bar had an actual logo back then. Mm-hmm. People don't realize that sometimes it was just stenciled on the door, or, it was called the Blue Parrot, and they had a blue parrot on the door. There was no name written out there largely for security. Um, but absolutely, there's, you know, a whole point of this is to get people to talk about the bars and the history. It's a large part of our history that has been ignored by a lot of the archivists and historians in the gay community because they're focusing on what political issue happened in 1971 or who was the most outspoken activist in 1983 or whatever. And those are the people and the topics that get covered. But the bars, they were our community centers. They were our safe havens. That's where we went to make friends, to feel as though we could, in today's terminology, you know, be our true self, be authentic. You couldn't do that at work. You couldn't do that in public. You know, I can tell you stories from even the late 80s and early 90s of being in a mall somewhere, you know, in say Richmond, Virginia, and having people stare because you had an ear pierced. You know, it was just, it's different now.
Right.
But even the younger people who weren't around to experience the bars in the 70s, 80s, or before then, it's an important part of history for them to understand where we came from and how we got to where we are now.
Absolutely. And can't say this enough is, you know, prior to all the apps and so forth that people use today, which is further kind of degrading the patronage of the gay bars, is the gay bars is, as you have indicated, and most know quite well, is they really helped shape and define the community
Oh, absolutely.
and made a community, because so often people, you know, outside of their small network of friends, you know, were fairly isolated.
That is very true. And a lot of people don't realize how it wasn't always bars necessarily. In fact, I've included some places in the collection that technically don't qualify as bars, but they were important meeting venues for gays. And one that comes to mind that is another one I think a lot of people have never heard of, but it does have some major significance, is a place in LA that was called Cooper Donuts. And you would never think of a donut shop as being any significant part of our gay history. But in May of 1959, 10 full years before Stonewall, the police came in late at night and attempted to arrest 5 patrons at this donut shop. 2 of them were transgender people of color, 2 of them were gay men, and the 5th one was a street hustler. And the police came in for no other reason than the fact that they knew the gay bar across the street had closed and that there would be gay people there and they might be, you know, touching each other's hand or doing something that was not allowed at the time. And they attempted to arrest them. But the donut shop and its patrons were so supportive of the gay community that other patrons started throwing coffee, donuts, plates, cups at the police officers, and they retreated. And that was kind of one of the first uprisings against, you know, police intervention in the gay community. And that was a full 10 years before Stonewall. But it's just kind of interesting to me to think that a small little mom and pop donut shop in LA could have been that bold. And if you Google Cooper Donuts in Los Angeles, you'll find the stories online. They're there. So to me, that's the interesting part too, is to learn about places that had a hand in this whole process, other than just, you know, everybody wants to lay all the credit on Stonewall. And in fact, a lot of people don't know Stonewall, where the uprising was in 1969, closed very shortly after that. So the Stonewall that we know today didn't even open until the 90s or late 80s. The Stonewall, it's in the same location, and they use the same name or a similar name, but in between, it was even called New Jimmy's for a while. It was,
Huh.
So it's changed names, it's changed hands several times, but it's really not a continuous, this bar has been the gay center of culture in New York for 50 plus years. It's one of many that's shaped our community over the decades.
Hmm.
Um, Another
And
interesting story that I ran across, and a lot of people may not know about this unless they lived in Atlanta. Um, there was a woman named Beth McMahon. She's still around. She's in Fort Lauderdale now, with her wife Dana, and they owned a bar in Fort Lauderdale called The Other Side. They also decided to open an Other Side in Atlanta. They remodeled an old Steak and Ale steakhouse, gutted it, and made it into a nice upscale bar with a piano bar that was separate off to one side. And even though Bev was a self-professed lesbian in a relationship with another woman, she didn't want it to be a lesbian bar. She wanted it to be a community bar. And so it was open to everyone. And there were quite a number of men who would go there. But a few months after the Atlanta Olympics, in February of 1997, there was a bomb that was actually two bombs that were set off on the property there as an attack on the gay community. And there was also a bomb in Atlanta around that time at an abortion clinic, I believe. But that's another one that, kind of played an important role in how the community got together, because these people that were in the bar, they were like a family. This was back 20 plus years ago. And they banded together and did what they could to help the people who were injured or, whatever. And it was a great testament to how the bar was actually part of the gay community and not just a revenue center for someone who owned it. So there are a lot of those stories out there. It's just, and I'm uncovering more and more every day.
very, very cool. So how does one get a hold of you in order to perhaps bring a bar to light and share perhaps their insights and stories with you?
So there are several ways. There's a page, what they call it a business page, a like page on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Gay Barchieves. There's also a group page on Facebook, which is facebook.com/groups/Gay Barchieves. In the Gay Barchieves group, it's free to join. We will never call you about your car warranty, and you're welcome to post about memories from any bars that you want, ask questions about old bars that have gone by, whatever. It's a new group. We've got about 500 members right now, but it's growing. Or you can go to the Gay Barchieves website and use the contact form and send us a message there. And of course, our email address is gaybarchieves@yahoo.com. So any way you choose to reach out, you can do that. And we welcome any input. We welcome, if you're working on a project that overlaps somehow, I'm happy to feature that. Yesterday, I posted about a gentleman by the name of Carl Hopgood, who is, I believe, from London originally, lives in California now. He's a neon sculptor and an artist, a multimedia artist. And one project he's working on right now is to make neon sculptures honoring the logos of the bars, the gay bars that were lost in LA to the COVID pandemic. And, a lot of people don't realize this. Maybe in your neighborhood, it hasn't happened yet, but there are many, many long-term gay bars that have vanished in 2020. Many of them. Lincoln, Nebraska had a bar called Panic. that was around since 1982. That's almost 40 years. It's gone. Boom in New Brunswick, Canada. The Manhandler in Chicago opened in 1980. It's gone. Badlands in San Francisco since 1975, 45 years, gone.
Oh, wow.
There's so many of them. Oil Can Harry's in Los Angeles. They opened in 1968, 52 years ago. They're now gone. And some of the newer but long-term bars from the early 80s in LA, Gold Coast and Rage, they're both gone. So it's really a sad statement that the COVID pandemic is taking the lives of so many gay bars that have been around so long, many of which have survived the AIDS pandemic. Or when AIDS came out, it had an impact on the gay scene too. But some of these bars, obviously Oil Can Harry's was around 15 years before HIV was a big news item, and yet they did not make it through COVID. So that should just underscore the importance of why we want to capture these stories and these memories so that future generations will have this information to look at, and that people who are alive that went to some of these places, can reminisce fondly. It's, everybody has their nostalgia somewhere. A friend of mine who's known in the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence world as Ursula Polari, has a collection of quilts that were passed down from great grandparents and grandparents. That's art's nostalgia. That gives him warm and fuzzy feelings when he looks at them and remembers the history of the family and the good old days, or even before then, past generations. And to me, Gay Barchieves is kind of a part of that, because many of us, we were in our teens or early 20s when we discovered the gay bar scene. And those are our fond memories. Those are our, things that we look back on and smile and think, oh, that was great times. And we met some great people. And a lot of us still have friends that we met through that scene 30, 40, 50 years ago. So it's just very important, I think, to kind of keep that in mind.
No, absolutely. I have some of my one of my best friends since I was 18 years old. I met at Construction 5 in Frankfurt, and we're still very, very close to this day. Another good friend who still lives in Germany, trans person with a mother that was German and American father. We're still connected and chat frequently, and that's where we met. And, so long-lasting friendships, as you stated, has happened and can happen in those scenes. And sad to hear about Badlands in San Francisco. I have danced I was going to say, I can't say it. I've danced my ass off there many a times. And and I do though also recognize how COVID is different. I mean, with the HIV crisis, there wasn't a, stay-at-home orders,
Right.
to the entire public, like COVID
And most gay
has.
people didn't expect to catch it by meeting, seeing another gay person in a bar. It
Right.
wasn't,
Or passing someone in a
airborne.
grocery store.
Right.
So,
It was completely different.
yeah, so it's definitely different, and it's taking its toll on so many businesses in all spectrum, but definitely in the gay community for the gay bars that were, after a couple of months, it's of paying rent and so forth. If they didn't own the buildings, would be, very difficult. And of course, it's affected all of the workers and, the staff and so forth there as well. This has been devastating, and it's going to be, I'm hopeful for this to end as quickly as possible.
I
But
understand completely. One aspect that I'm asked about somewhat regularly about this project is, it's called Gay Barchieves, and it's not meant to be exclusive of women or trans or anything else. But back in my day, when I came out and became immersed in gay culture, gay was an overall term that meant anyone who wasn't straight. But so it wasn't, it's not like I intentionally didn't call it LGBTQ barchives or whatever. But the one thing that I will say is that, of course, it is largely focused on bars that might be labeled as gay or LGBTQ as opposed to lesbian, because the lesbian bars were, even in the heyday of gay bars back in the late 70s, early 80s, whatever, were few and far between, and for the most part clandestine. They didn't advertise much. They were more word of mouth and, a local little speakeasy type or hole in the wall. And that's something that's being highlighted right now by a project, which I'm so happy that I stumbled across this information a couple months ago. But Jägermeister, the alcohol, that company is spearheading a Save the Night project, and they're partnering with the Lesbian Bar Project. The Lesbian Bar Project has a website, lesbianbarproject.com, and they're announcing to the world that in the entire United States right now, we are down to a mere 15 lesbian bars. That's one lesbian bar for every 3 states, roughly.
wow.
And when you look at the map on their website, and you realize in the center of the country there are hardly any. Most of them are there's a few on the West Coast. There's a big one in Texas called Sue Ellen's. There's one in Atlanta, my sister's room. But all told, only 15, which explains a little bit why it's so hard for me to find a bunch of lesbian bars to feature. But there's probably, 30 or 40 lesbian bars in the collection. And I welcome anyone who knows anything about a lesbian bar that's no longer around. I will gladly add it. It's just that it's been very difficult to find the information for the most part. And the mega bars, which are the ones that get the most publicity, and we all know at least 1 or 2 mega bars. The Hippo in Baltimore, it's a huge, huge bar that was the center of gay life there. I think they opened in 1972. And it was the first gay bar I ever went to, which was funny because I walked in with a guy that I was kind of dating. He was my boyfriend at the time, but we didn't know that term. And I was visiting him at college, and he said, let's go to dinner. And we went to dinner, and then he said, let's go across the street to this bar. And we went in ordered a drink, and I'm standing there at the rail looking down toward the dance floor. And a few minutes later, it occurred to me that everybody on the dance floor was male. And it kind of put a big smile on my face because at that point, I had never been to a gay bar. And I'm not going to say when that was because that would make me seem really old, but it was more than 40 years ago. And it was just very reassuring to know that we had those kind of places we could go and not have to hide and not have to pretend we had a girlfriend or, blah, blah, blah. We could be who we were. We could be our authentic selves. And unfortunately, Hippo closed 5 years ago, and it's now a CVS drugstore. But, one of the many bars that's that played a very important role for 40 or 50 years in their local community. And
Wow.
kind of,
Yes. Well, very interesting stories. And, I'd like to invite all of our listeners and or viewers to join the Facebook group at Gay Barchieves on Facebook or gaybarchieves.com. We'll have the links in the show notes to make that easy for you. And if you know of a bar that's no longer here, even ones due to COVID, reach out to Art and let him know and provide any information that you can about it to help make his life a little easier on doing that research and possibly contacting the bar owners for more information. Well, much appreciate this great information. Is there anything you'd like to share before we sign off today?
the only thing I would like to throw in is a little something that might make a few people smile, just to think about some of the weird names and things that we had for bars back in the day. In the course of my studies and my research, I came across a bar in LA that was pretty popular for about 8 years. They had a private club aspect to it, as well as being open to the public for cocktails in the evening. They had private dining, nice restaurant. They had the humorously named Toss Your Own Salad Bar. But what struck me as amusing was it's probably the most interesting name of a gay bar that I've ever run across. And I would challenge anybody out there, if you know of a bar with a crazier name, a gay bar with a crazier name than this, I want to know about it. It was called Sewers of Paris. Sewers, Sewers of Paris. And they used one of the design that I featured in their listing is a drawing of like a little street corner. And there's this funky looking guy in a beret popping out with pushing a manhole cover up. I don't know why it was called Sewers of Paris. I'm sure there's a story there, but
interesting.
I'd like to hear some more interesting stories like that about, interestingly named bars and the stories behind those names.
Yeah, that would just sound too savory.
But they were there for about 8 years, so they must have been doing something right.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, I've certainly enjoyed this dialogue. I think it's going to pique the interest of our listeners and viewers over time. So I much appreciate you coming on and sharing about your project.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for staying tuned and reward yourself. Go ahead and hit that subscribe or follow button, depending on which application that you are listening or viewing this on. It is on OutBüro.com under the episodes link up at the top, where you'll find all of the show notes for all of the episodes that we have done so far. Be sure to subscribe also on any of the podcasting apps if you would like to listen to this on the go. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google, Apple, and about 10 others. Also, you are able to watch this sitting back, eating your popcorn with your cocktail on your comfy couch on Get Happy TV. That is Get Happy, happy with an I, .tv. It's a free LGBTQ on-demand television network that's completely free. It's supported by commercials. So add that to your smart TV today and watch episodes of OutBüro Voices. Thank you so much. This is Dennis Velco, and we'll see you on OutBüro.com. Bye-bye.